Hello and welcome to the Hindus Parlay podcast. I am your host N. Sai Charan. The rise in usage of artificial intelligence tools in education has triggered a debate on their impact on critical thinking abilities of students. There is a mounting fear that with increasing reliance on AI-driven tools for learning, students are likely to become more inclined to accept information at its face value rather than engaging in analytical thinking. While AI tools offer personalized learning experiences and easy access to information, they also raise concerns about over reliance and reduced cognitive engagement. In countries like India, where diverse educational systems and access disparities exist, the challenge lies in ensuring that these tools enhance learning without undermining the development of critical thinking, creativity, and problem solving skills essential for students. To discuss this further, we have two experts Mr. Arun Tangirala, Professor Chemical Engineering, IIT Tirupati, Dean Competency Development and Outreach, and Professor of Wadhwani School of Data Science and AI, IIT Madras. Another expert is Mr. Arul Scaria, Professor of Law, National Law School of India, University, Bengaluru. Let me begin with Mr. Tangirala. My first question to you, sir, is should AI be permitted in college classrooms? And if yes, to what extent?
Greetings. It's a great pleasure to be a part of this podcast and on a very hot and contemporary subject, very timely. To answer your question, I think a simple answer is yes, AI should be permitted. And the reason is very straightforward. AI has pervaded every aspect of our technology and of our lives. So it's obviously not a good idea to prohibit it or exclude it. It's better to be inclusive and realign. This is what I've been saying in many forums. Even if you were to prohibit it, students will use it because it has pervaded every home and every device that the student uses. Now, the extent to which it has to be used and who should be using it in the classroom and so on is entirely contextual because it's depending on the topic or the subject that one would be teaching, the usage would be different. If I'm teaching a coding course or let's say a technical course based on math or science course, physics, chemistry, and so on, the usage of AI would be different from if I'm teaching a philosophy course or maybe a humanities course. Yes, today we can use AI in many different ways, and there are a set of uses for the teacher. There are a set of uses for the student. One has to first look at the outcomes of learning or the objectives of that particular teaching session or the course or the program, and then plan the course. For example, if I'm teaching, let us say, a math course, I would ask myself, and I do this, I state these outcomes, the learning outcomes, and say, this is what I aim to impart. And in that, if cognitive skills turns out to be the topmost things, the topmost skill or the outcome of your interest, then maybe you use AI to a minimal extent, right? But let us say I'm teaching somebody how to code and so on. So if you look at industry today, the skill set shift has occurred. The coding, the ability to code is not the primary skill, but the ability to evaluate a code is more or less the evolving skill. So I would use AI because everybody uses AI these days to generate codes. Better to keep them on par and train students in using AI for coding. Try different tools, train them in evaluating, validating the codes, and so on. And most importantly, make sure that they're using this in an ethical and a responsible way. So, if I'm teaching music, it would be different, right? So, to what extent it should be permitted entirely depends on the subject. And again, say this yes, AI should be permitted. There are no government regulations yet on this, and worldwide, this is mostly the scenario. So, institutes And sometimes the instructors or the teachers may have to form their own rules and declare that very clearly at the beginning of the course or during the exam or during the class and so on, and also explain why those restrictions are being imposed or being stated. So in short, I do this. I mean, as a teacher, I use the AI for generating podcasts or for generating fact or generating study guides and so on. And I also encourage my students to use that, but I tell them that whenever you use it, do declare it if it has to be done. For example, if you're making a presentation and so on. So as long as things are done in a systematic, informed, ethical, and responsible manner, AI should be allowed because it is now like your mobile or a computer which has pervaded not only your classrooms, but our homes and everywhere. Okay, so that's my response to that question.
Thank you, sir. Professor Scaria, your introductory remarks. Should AI be permitted in college classrooms? And if yes, to what extent?
Sure, Saicharan, first of all, thanks for making me also a part of this discussion. I generally agree with most of what Professor Tangirala was saying. So I also think that we have reached a situation wherein it is nearly impossible and maybe even it is futile to have an absolute prohibition of AI in classrooms. Whether we like it or not, I think that's a reality. What might be required is, yes, we might have to change our teaching and learning approaches according to this changing scenario. And I'm saying this particularly because AI is also getting more and more integrated into many of the applications we use daily. For example, if you take Microsoft Word, yes, Copilot is getting integrated there. Even if you open Adobe Reader, one of the things which it now suggests is, shall I give you a AI-generated summary? So it is kind of a situation wherein it is very evident that we have to deal with this issue. But now, when we talk about the use of AI in classrooms, we have to also understand that it is not just students who are bringing AI into classroom. Teachers are also using it in many different ways. The school administrators also want to bring it into the classroom. And even many policymakers are also of the opinion that there should be more use of AI in education. But in all these use contexts, what is required is what Professor Tangirala was also mentioning earlier, ethical and responsible AI usage policies. AI is very helpful in many ways, but it is also a tool that needs to be used very, very cautiously for a wide variety of reasons, including, but not limited to, issues like hallucinations and potential biases in responses. So whatever be the manner in which we are integrating AI into the curriculum or evaluation, whatever it might be, it is very important that we take a cautious approach in this regard. I also, again, would like to express my agreement with Professor Tangirala that to a great extent, the decision on the extent of use should be clearly guided by the learning objectives of the concerned courses. So be it science, technology, or humanities, yes, there would be different situations wherein use of AI is helpful. If it is helpful, yes, we can actually use it. Again, just to give you one example from my discipline. So I teach a comparative copyright law course in collaboration with Professor William Fisher at Harvard Law School. So one of the assignments which I give to the students is to use different AI platforms to generate potentially copyright infringing materials. So through this hands-on experience, they get a better picture of, okay, what are the diverse issues in this particular area, and even they get a better sense of whether it is possible to prevent generation of potentially copyright infringing materials and what kind of steps are put in by firms in this particular regard to address these kinds of issues. So there are many usage cases wherein, yes, the clear instructions to use AI can also be helpful, but there might also be situations wherein, yes, this is not required. So, in a nutshell, I think what we need to do is to one, evolve general guidelines for all stakeholders in an educational institution, but then let the specific approaches for each course be developed as per the learning objectives of those courses. So, depending on the learning objectives of a particular course, the concerned course faculty should be able to fine tune the approaches in this particular regard. So, that would be my response here.
Thank you, sir. At present, there are concerns that students may overly dependent on AI-generated responses instead of engaging in deep thinking. Are these concerns valid, and how can this be addressed? Professor Tangirala, your views on this?
Yeah, I think this is a corollary in some sense of the previous question, but a more specific one. And yes, so this fear I keep hearing among people, among many teachers, and so on across forums. I feel that perhaps it's only a superficial fear. If you actually start digging deep, you realize that this is perhaps not a very valid fear. I'll tell you why. There are several reasons. One entirely depends on what skills we want to impart. So, if I am teaching in an academic institution has its own goals apart from preparing them for employment. And those goals or objectives may include training students into scholarly or deep thinking. But at the same time, you also have to have a balance of practicality and so on. So we have to train our students also in getting into jobs, not necessarily scholarly ones, but where they can implement what they have learned. So in a course, we'll have to probably ask how much of deep thinking skills we want to impart vis-a-vis how much of implementation or theory to practice skills we want to impart. Again, that will vary from course to course, and that will also depend on the type of audience that you're teaching. If you're teaching your regular students, the objectives may be different. And on the other hand, if you're offering, let's say, an online program for executive program for professionals, then you may cut down on the deep thinking part of the theory, but you may want them to think deeply about the results that come out of the implementation. So, deep thinking about what is the question? Are we only thinking of theory, or also we are thinking of deep thinking about the results and the practical aspects? I think none of that is going to change much, but you will also have to look at what skill set is required as we march ahead into the future. If you roll back several decades, you will see the arrival of calculator. Did it take away the ability to mentally calculate? Yes and no, but the thing is, were the skills required as we went along? Yes, but not in every aspect. As long as you know how to formulate the problem and how to calculate and so on, you are in a great position, and your skills are valued. So the answer to your question is, will it take away the ability to deep think? Yes, if they are only trained in that. But is that a concern? Well, it depends entirely. And again, I'll say the same thing that I've said earlier. You'll have to really plan what we want to teach, and starting from the outcomes. If the learning outcomes includes deep thinking, then teach that way. I do that in my time series analysis course that I teach currently at IIT Tirupati. I use a mix. I mean, I show them how to implement things in our software. I also teach them how to use AI to generate codes or AI to generate some questions and so on. But I also engage them in thinking in the classroom, where I keep aside all the slides and I derive things on the board. I ask simple questions and so on. So it's a mixture of ingredients, because I want them to have all these mixed skills. Whereas I may not go to that extent in an executive program and so on, right? So my feeling is that the deep thinking shift has occurred from theory to deep thinking about the tools. For some who aspire to be fundamental theorists and so on, the deep thinking about theory remains, and we'll have to identify such situations and proceed accordingly. Just as the way calculator has changed the skill set requirement and perhaps the abilities, these things will also change. The computer has also changed. But it is, I think, the law that keeps, that governs the evolution or the progress of this universe or how things proceed. Some skill set vanishes, some skill set vanishes, some skill set arrive. When we went from Tonga to motor vehicles, the ability to ride a horse or a Tonga is no longer required. But now I have to learn how to drive an automobile. And that's how things proceed. So let us ask a more complete question rather than an incomplete question. We'll have to state the context, we'll have to state the purpose, and deep thinking about what. Then then we can come with a very concrete answer. But as it stands, based on the question that you asked, I think the fear is only kind of a superficial reaction to begin with. It's a very natural thing to any new technology that arrives. I always say better to realign than to resign. So that's my response.
Thank you, sir. Professor Scaria, your thoughts on the concerns about the over dependence on AI?
So on this point, maybe I have a slightly different perspective from what Professor Tangirala was actually sharing. So, of course, I mean, he was very much emphasizing on the fact that yes, this very much depends on the skill set dimension which we are looking at. But at a broader level, I fear that we are currently seeing an over dependence on AI generated responses among students and sometimes even among many faculty members. And in my opinion, we need to clearly understand the limitations of AI, and we also need to educate students and teachers on how to be responsible AI users, particularly by understanding the limitations of the technology. And as we discussed earlier, to a great extent, this might even require reimagining many components of our education. Professor Tangirala mentioned about calculators. Yes, calculators is a great example because at that time also, yes, people had raised similar concerns. But I just wanted to flag that maybe the kind of technology which we are talking about here can make far more negative impacts if we are following an indiscriminate adoption with respect to this technology for a wide variety of reasons, including the fact that many a times the outputs generated by the concerned AI system is not completely dependent on the inputs that have been put in by the concerned user. So there are many external factors influencing the output, unlike a computer or unlike a calculator. That's the example which Professor Tangirala had mentioned earlier. So again, I want to also re-emphasize that I'm not saying everything is in a bad situation. All what I'm saying is currently I see an over dependence on AI generated responses, and we definitely need to engage in more discussions with students as well as teachers on the limitations of the technology. And I'm also truly hoping that over a period of time, that kind of a more matured approach will happen even with respect to AI technologies. But as it stands now, my general fear is that most of the times people are actually overlooking the limitations of the technology. And that's a general challenge which we are facing as a society now.
Thank you, sir. And apart from students and faculties using AI, now the entire courses too are running with AI produced materials. In that case, do you think will AI slowly be seen as something which is indispensable and a critical infrastructure and to be made as the integral part of a curriculum? Professor Tangirala, your views on this?
Yeah, I think everybody probably the answer is obvious. Yes, yeah, even based on a response to the first question itself, it's quite clear that AI is going to be integral to every operation, every type of operation in an academic institution or a company or any other organization. Therefore, I think preparations have to be underway in order to integrate AI into the infrastructure in a seamless way. And technologies are already doing that. There was a mention earlier about Adobe and PowerPoint using AI, in fact, integrating AI into their tool set to help the user prepare effective and fantastic presentations and so on. So you can see that it's already happening, and academic institutions are no exception in that regard. See, with regards to usage of AI, how much of AI should be integrated in the infrastructure and to what extent it'll be required and so on, one has to go and assess in how many different ways AI can be used in your organization or your institution, number one. And number two, there will always be an overreaction. So the over dependence of AI will always happen, and it will happen in any new technology, even with computers, it happened. But that is a typical response. There is an overshoot, and then there is a steady state. That steady state gets dictated by the, it gets balanced out by the equations that we have, by the interactions that we have with the outside world. And one has to keep those also in mind. So, for example, there is this report published by World Economics Forum, and they keep publishing this from time to time. And that's a very good report to read up because it not only throws light in a very detailed manner on what is the future skills that is required, but also sheds light on how institutions should realign. So this is the Future of Jobs Report 2025, published in January. And if you see the top skills that are required for the learner, it is cognitive thinking, it is social connect, and so on, right? The programming and so on is low. In fact, if you compare with the report that came out, I think in 23 or 22, the big difference that you see in 2025 is the arrival of AI, the AI related skills. And if AI related skills have to be acquired, not only by the users, but also by the employers, everyone, then that has to be integrated into the infrastructure. Just one point that I want to make in closing is, yes, we have had technological revolutions from time to time, not every decade, but yeah, we have had milestone revolutions and paradigm shifts happening. If you go back to calculator, then to computer to AI, there are some similarities, but there is a very stark difference. I mean, it was also mentioned earlier. Big difference with AI, and this has to be kept in mind when it's integrated into the infrastructure, is that unlike a calculator or a computer, AI tools like ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever LLM models that you're using, they take your data and broadcast it back to the server, which means that your own personal information, confidential information, and so on could be at complete stake if it is not integrated properly. So there has to be a very secure way of integrating AI into the infrastructure. And every employee, every user of this AI aspect of infrastructure has to be trained, oriented, and cautioned or made aware about the benefits, but also the side effects and so on. And at a higher level, like we have IT security today, we need AI security as well. And once that AI security layer is there, then perhaps we can start using AI safely in the organization.
Thank you, sir. Professor Scaria, your remarks on courses running on AI today.
Yeah, I also generally agree that AI is becoming a critical infrastructure in many different ways. And the government and the other stakeholders need to be mindful of this. What does this mean? So the most important thing is that, yes, if this is a critical infrastructure, we have to also take appropriate measures for regulating this infrastructure. Just to give you one example, now I am seeing many state governments suggesting adoption of AI in schools. But one question which I think we often forget or ignore in this regard is, has there been a safety audit of the AI tools that have been suggested for incorporation in these schools? Has there been an audit on the potential biases that might be existing in the system? Even with respect to the training data, yes, are we demanding disclosure? Of course, in some jurisdictions, yes, we are seeing some initiatives happening in this regard, but in the Indian context, have we started demanding disclosure? And Professor Tangirala very rightly pointed out earlier that yes, there could even be potential violations of privacy rights, right? Are we actually mindful of those kinds of impacts? So the most important thing which I want to convey here is that yes, AI is slowly becoming a critical infrastructure. And if it is becoming a critical infrastructure, we also need to evolve appropriate regulatory systems in this particular regard.
Yes, as Professor Scaria rightly pointed out about regulation. So my next question is, from what we have discussed so far, we can say AI is here to stay, and likely to become an integral part of, like, more and more an integral part of life. So, Professor Tangirala, do you think we should accept it in a regulated way rather than being critical about it? Should universities come up with regulations for its usage in academic work?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to my earlier statement, better to realign than to resign. So there are apprehensions, there are a lot of fears and so on about the usage of AI. But I think we should start using it. Even in yesterday's class that I was talking to my students, and I teach this introduction to research or the research methodology course, and I was telling them how they could potentially use AI to make effective presentations and so on. It was one of the topics that we were discussing. And I said, for a long time, I also desisted. One of the students pointed out that, look, I don't want to use tools like Grammarly and AI related things because I feel my skills will go down. My own skills will go down. But she also added very nicely towards the end saying, look, although I have all these reservations against using AI, but I think I have to go with the flow. So while I appreciated that, I also said, look, there are my reason for getting into usage of AI is to really experience what the fears are. There is no point in imagining. Start using AI, of course, in a limited way, and experience the benefits and the possible risks, and see if you can, at an individual level, start learning how to use AI in a safe way. And I think it's like automobile, right? I mean, it's like any technology that is meant for the user. You learn how to use it, you start enjoying the benefits, but you also be aware of the safety aspect, the security aspect. Safety includes security. And of course, then for automobiles, we have excellent regulations today. For AI, it'll take some time. In fact, there are countries today which have been saying, forget about regulations for now because that's going to hamper the growth of this technology. But I think I disagree. You'll have to really have both of these evolving. While the technology is evolving, discussions on regulation should also happen. I think the European Union has been very active on that. And in India also, there is now an increasing discussion, but it'll take some time before the actual regulations kick in. It may be a few years. We can't wait until then. We may become, our skill set may become either outdated or obsolete. Rather than that, start using it, regulate it locally for yourself first. Then we will be in a position to even offer advice or any suggestion to the higher ups or to the organization. So I think things have to happen in parallel. As a baby, we didn't say that until I know how to crawl very well, I mean, how to walk very well, I will not eat. I think we have learned how to we have learned how to master each of these skills in parallel. So let's start using AI in a small way. And then once we are comfortable, start using it in a bigger way and wait for the regulations to happen as it will happen in parallel. We have to do this by ourselves first because, as we have been saying, both Professor Scaria and I have been saying that AI is going to be integral. So better not wait. That is my message.
Professor Scaria, your thoughts on the need of the hour to put in place some regulations to use AI, and should we wait or should we go ahead with using AI?
Sure. So by now, I think it's very clear that the state might take some time to frame regulations in this regard. But in the interim, to me, it is very, very vital that each and every university initiate dialogues among both faculty members as well as students on responsible AI usage. And as Professor Tangirala was also trying to point out through his interventions, this will help in evolving appropriate and ethical AI usage guidelines as per the needs of every institution. And it is very evident that, yes, we cannot have universal rules for everyone, but at least some general guidelines can be evolved at the institution levels. For example, appropriate disclosure norms. So if you are using AI for as part of any assignment, I think the minimum which we can ask is, yes, the concerned student or the faculty member need to disclose that AI has been used for producing that particular work. And then they can also clarify in what manner it has been used, or what tools have been used, or what prompts have been used. Then, based on the general guidelines, the faculty members teaching a particular course should be able to formulate specific AI policies for their courses. So if you look at most of the prominent global universities, it is very evident that, yes, most of them have started having a general AI policy. And most of the prominent ones have also left it to the concerned faculty to frame the specific policy with respect to their courses. As we discussed earlier, it would to a great extent depend upon the learning objectives of a particular course. The sad thing is that most of our universities haven't started deliberations on having at least a general AI policy within the university. I truly hope that discussions like this will prompt our institutions to frame general guidelines and thereby also persuade each and every faculty member to frame their own specific policies with respect to the courses they teach. I think that's the only way forward at this point.
Yes, with this, we come to the end of this podcast. It's a very important discussion on to what extent we can rely on AI tools in classrooms. Professor Tangirala and Professor Scaria, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights for the Hindus Parlay podcast. Thank you once again. We will catch up in another time.
Our
It was
pleasure.
my pleasure.
And, yeah, so we look forward, of course, to a very safe, ethical, and efficient use of AI in education.